And I'll give the floor to Madame von der Leyen for her statement.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, members of the European Parliament. Exactly 40 years ago, the first President of the European Parliament, Simone Veil, is elected and puts forward her vision of a more unified and more just Europe. It is thanks to her and all the other European icons that today I am able to put forward to you my vision of Europe. And 40 years later, it is with great pride that I am able to say, finally, a woman is candidate for the presidency of the European Commission. I am that woman thanks to all of those women who broke through the barriers and the conventions. I am that woman thanks to all of those who built a Europe of peace, of unity, and a Europe of values. It is this European conviction that has guided me throughout my life and my career as a mother, as a doctor, and also as a politician. It is that courage and boldness demonstrated by the pioneers such as Simone Veil that is at the very heart of my vision of Europe, and it will be that spirit that will guide the European Commission that I have the intention to be the president of. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, members of the European Parliament, the founding fathers and mothers of Europe, from the ruins and ashes of the World War, created a fantastic new world of peace with a stronger common market, the ability to work and study and research across borders. 500 million Europeans now live between Riga and Limassol, between Athens and Lisbon, in wealth and freedom. My children's generation is able to look ahead to a Europe which is a home, and they can't really imagine it any other way. And those born into that positive generation assumed as parents that this would always be the case. But today, it is now clear that we are going to have to fight, that we're going to have to rise up for this Europe of ours. The whole world is called upon with disruptive developments apace, not to allow this to pass by Europe. Globalization of the world economy, the huge digitalization of our world of work, and of course, climate change. None of these developments are new. They have been predicted by our scientists for a long time. But the new thing is that as citizens of Europe today, irrespective of which country we live in, the impact of that is something that we are feeling in our daily lives. Whether it's the Finnish wheat growers affected by drought, or the effects that are now made palpable in France, we are all experiencing climate change. Online banking is now in the daily lives of the Irish, or in Poland, people after 20 years in the workplace are having to take further training just to remain in the workplace. So we are all feeling this very close and personal. And whether it's in the schools or hospitals, companies in Europe which are having to close, we are experiencing demographic change as well, up close and personal.
With a feeling of losing control, of losing ties with our communities. None of these challenges will go away. But there have been different ways to react to these trends. Some are turning towards authoritarian regimes. Some are buying their global influence and creating dependencies by investing in ports and roads. And others are turning towards protectionism, None of these options are for us. We want multilateralism, we want fair trade, we defend the rules-based order because we know it is better for all of us. We have to do it the European way. But if we are to go down the European path, we must first rediscover our unity. If we are united on the inside, nobody will divide us from the outside. If we close the gaps between us, we can turn tomorrow's challenges in tomorrow's opportunities. Honourable members, our most pressing challenge is keeping our planet healthy. This is the greatest responsibility and opportunity of our times. I want Europe to become the first climate-neutral continent in the world by 2050. To make this happen, we must take bold steps together. Our current goal of reducing our emissions by 40% by 2030 is not enough. We must go further. We must strive for more. A two-step approach is needed to reduce CO2 emissions by 2030 by 50, if not 55%. The European Union will lead international negotiations to increase the level of ambition of other major economies by 2021. Because to achieve real impact, we do not only have to be ambitious at home, we have to do that, yes, but the world has to move together. To make this happen, I will put forward a Green Deal for Europe in my first 100 days in office. I will put forward the first ever European climate law, which will set the 2050 target in law. This increase of ambition will need investment on a major scale. Public money will not be enough. I will propose a Sustainable Europe investment plan and turn parts of the European Investment Bank into a climate bank. This will unlock €1 trillion of investment over the next decade. It means change. All of us and every sector will have to contribute, from aviation to maritime transport to the way each and every one of us travels and lives. Emissions must have a price that changes our behavior. To complete this work and to ensure our companies can compete on a level playing field, I will introduce a carbon border tax to avoid carbon leakage. But, honourable members, what is good for our planet must also be good for our people and our regions. Of course, I know about the importance of cohesion funds, but we need more. We need a just transition for all. Not all of our regions have the same starting point, but we all share the same destination. This is why I will propose a just transition fund to support those most affected. This is the European way. We are ambitious, we leave nobody behind, and we offer perspectives. If we want to succeed with this ambitious plan, we need a strong economy. Because what we want to spend, we have to earn it first. For that, we need to strengthen the backbone of our economy, the small and medium-sized enterprises. They are innovative, they are entrepreneurial, they are flexible and agile, they create jobs, They provide vocational training to our youth. But they can only do all this if they have access to capital everywhere in this huge single market. Let's get rid of all the barriers. Let's open the door. Let's finally complete the Capital Markets Union. Our small and medium enterprises deserve it. And we need to work with the Stability and Growth Pact. Where investment and reforms are needed, we should make sure they can be done. We should make use of all the flexibility allowed in the rules. We are proud of our economy. We want to make it stronger, but there's also a clear and simple logic. It's not people that serve our economy. It's the economy that serves our people. In our social market economy, we must reconcile the market with the social. Therefore, I will refocus our European semester to make sure we stay on track with our sustainable development goals. And I will stand for fair taxes, whether for brick and mortar industries or digital business. When the tech giants are making huge profits in Europe, this is fine because we are an open market and we like competition. But if they are making these profits by benefiting from our education system, our skilled workers, our infrastructure, and our social security, if this is so, it is not acceptable that they make profits, but they are barely paying any taxes because they play our tax system. If they want to benefit, they have to share the burden. Honourable members, the European way is also about using all of our potential, our people, our talent, our diversity. It is about creating a fairer and more equal union. This will drive me forward every single day I am in office, as it has throughout my career. We have come a long way since I was a Minister for Family Affairs and had to fight to introduce parental pay or access to childcare for families. But the fight for fairness never stops. It is still too difficult for hard-working families to make ends meet in Europe. I want to ensure that work pays. In a social market economy, every person that is working full-time should earn a minimum wage that pays for a decent living. Therefore, we will develop a framework, of course in respect of the different labour markets. But I think the optimal option is to have collective bargaining by employers' union and trade union, because they tailor the minimum wage to the sector or to the region necessary. Of course, I'm aware there are different models, but we have to create the framework. And I want better protection for those who lose their job when our economy takes a severe hit. A European unemployment reinsurance scheme will support our economies and our people in times of external shocks. Of course, there are national unemployment insurances, but a reinsurance scheme for those heavy external shocks is needed in Europe. I also want more equality and fairness for our young people. Youth unemployment is at 14% in Europe, but it ranges from 5% to 40% in some countries. We cannot accept this. Young people have aspirations. They want to work. They want to have a future. And it is our job to let them achieve this. This is why I will make sure the Youth Guarantee, which I started when I was a Minister for Labour Affairs in our Council, is working as well as it can in every member state. And I will support the European Parliament's idea to triple the Erasmus budget as part of the next long-term budget. We have to care for the most vulnerable, our children. We have to fight poverty. I know, as a mother of 7, that it makes a difference for their entire life if children have access to education, to sport, to music, to healthy food, and to a loving environment. We need a child guarantee to help ensure that every child in Europe at risk of poverty and social exclusion has access to the most basics of rights, like healthcare and education. It will empower them, and it pays tremendously if we back them when they are young. And this is part of my action plan to bring our pillar of social rights to life. And I will start at home, by example. I will ensure full gender equality in my College of Commissioners. If member states do not propose enough female commissioners, I will not hesitate to ask for new names. Since 1958, there have been 183 commissioners. Only 35 were women. That is less than 20%. We represent half of our population. We want our fair share. We also need to talk openly about violence against women. If 1 in 5 women have already suffered physical or sexual violence in the European Union, and 55% of women have been sexually harassed, this is clearly not a women's issue. I will propose to add violence against women on the list of EU crimes defined in the treaty, and the European Union should join the Istanbul Convention. I'm convinced if we close those gaps between us, we will emerge stronger as a union. Honourable members, the cradle of our European civilization is Greek philosophy and Roman law. And our European continent went through its darkest period when we were ruled by dictators and rule of law was banished. For centuries, Europeans fought so hard for their liberty and independence. The rule of law is our best tool to defend these freedoms and to protect the most vulnerable in our union. This is why there can be no compromise when it comes to respecting the rule of law. There never will be. I will ensure that we use our full and comprehensive toolbox at European level. In addition, I fully support an EU-wide rule of law mechanism. And to be clear, the new instrument is not alternative to the existing instruments, but an additional one. The Commission will always be independent guardian of the treaty. Lady Justice is blind. She will defend the rule of law wherever it is attacked. Honourable members, the rule of law is universal. It applies to all. In the last 5 years, more than 17,000 people have drowned in the Mediterranean, which has become one of the deadliest borders in the world. At sea, there is the duty to save lives. And in our treaties and conventions, there is the legal and moral duty to respect the dignity of every human being. The European Union can and must defend these values. The European Union needs humane borders. We must save. But saving alone is not enough. We must reduce irregular migration. We must fight smugglers and traffickers. It's organized crime. We must preserve the right to asylum and improve the situation of refugees, for example, through humanitarian corridors in close cooperation with the UNHCR. We need empathy and decisive action. I am aware of how difficult and divisive discussions on these issues are. We need to address the legitimate concerns of many and look at how we can overcome our differences. I will propose a new pact on migration and asylum, including the relaunch of the Dublin reform. This will allow us to return to a fully functioning Schengen area of free movement, the key driver of our prosperity, security, and freedoms. A centerpiece in this ambition is a reinforced European Border and Coast Guard Agency. We need to reach a standing core of 10,000 Frontex border guards, not by 2027, but way earlier, at least by 2024. We have to modernize our asylum system. A common European asylum system must be exactly that, common. We can only have stable external borders if we give enough help to member states facing the most pressure because of where they are on the map. We need solidarity. We need to help each other and to contribute. We need a new way of burden sharing. And we must make a fair cooperation offer to countries of origin and transit, which are in the interest of both sides. Diplomacy, economic development, investment, stability and security are needed so that people have a perspective. I would like to tell you a story about perspective. 4 years ago, I was lucky enough to welcome a 19-year-old refugee from Syria into my home and into my family. He spoke no German. He was deeply scarred by his experience of civil war and flight. Today, 4 years later, he's fluent in German, he's fluent in English, he's of course fluent in Arabic. He is a community leader by day in vocational training and a student for his high school degree by night. He is an inspiration for us all. And one day, he wants to go home. And honorable members, as a defense minister, I've been many times in this war-torn neighborhood. I will never forget the words of former president of Iraq, Massoum, who said, "We want to see more Europe here. The world is calling for more Europe. The world needs more Europe." I believe Europe should have a stronger and more united voice in the world, and it needs to act fast. And that is why we must have the courage to take foreign policy decisions by qualified majority and to stand united behind them. The cornerstone of our collective defense will always be NATO. We will stay transatlantic, and we have to become more European. This is why we created the European Defence Union. Our work for our European Union of Security and Defence is embedded in comprehensive security. Stabilization always comes with diplomacy, reconciliation, and reconstruction. Our servicemen and servicewomen work side by side with police officers, diplomats, and development aid workers. And honourable members, these men and women deserve our utmost respect and recognition for their tireless service for Europe. I cannot talk about Europe without talking about our friends from the United Kingdom. For the very first time in 2016, a member state decided to leave the European Union. This is a serious decision. We regret it, but we respect it. Since then, together with the current government of the United Kingdom, the European Union has worked hard to organize the orderly departure of the United Kingdom. The withdrawal agreement concluded with the government of the United Kingdom provides certainty where Brexit created uncertainty, in preserving the rights of citizens and in preserving peace and stability on the island of Ireland. These two priorities are mine too. However, I stand ready for a further extension of the withdrawal date should more time be required for a good reason. In any case, the United Kingdom will remain our ally, our partner, and our friend. Honourable members, when I came to Strasbourg 13 days ago, I promised I'd come to listen. I've heard your concerns, your hopes, your expectations. The political guidelines which I sent to you today reflect our discussions. From what I have heard, I've drawn my conclusions and I've made my decisions. First, I want European citizens to play a leading and active part in building the future of our Union. I want them to have their say at a conference on the future of Europe to start in 2020 and to run for 2 years. Second, I want us to work together to improve the Spitzenkandidat system. We need to make it more visible to a wider electorate, and we need to address the issue of transnational lists at the European elections as a complementary tool of European democracy. And third, yes, I support a right of initiative for the European Parliament. When this House, acting by a majority of its members, adopts resolutions requesting the Commission to submit legislative proposals, I commit to responding with a legislative act in full respect of the proportionality, subsidiarity and better lawmaking principles. I'm convinced that our stronger partnership will further help to make people's voices heard. Herr Präsident.
Mr. President, my father was 15 years old when vile war that had brought devastation by my country and displacement and destruction to our continent ended. He often told his children, me and my 6 siblings, about it. Above all, he told us how significant it had been that the other countries reached out a hand to us again to bring us into the circle of democratic peoples. He started in the coal and steel community and said at the outset, we're trading with each other again. And if we're trading, then friendships will grow up and friends will not shoot at each other. He was head of cabinet for the von der Groben in the Hallstein Commission and later Director General for competition issues. That is why I was born in Brussels and became European before later learning that I was German and a citizen of Lower Saxony. And that is why there is only one thing for me: to unify and strengthen Europe. Anyone who wishes to strengthen and help this Europe of ours to grow and blossom will find in me a passionate fighter by their side. But anyone who seeks to weaken, split, or destroy its values will find in me a fierce opponent. In his old age, at the end of his life, my father's story about Europe had changed. He no longer talked about war so much. He said, Europe is like a long marriage. Love may not be greater than on the first day, but it gets deeper. Because we know that we can rely on each other in good times and in bad. Because we know we can argue but be reconciled again. Because we never forget why we formed this alliance. All of us in this room live in a Europe that has grown up, matured, and grown strong with its 500 million inhabitants. Over 200 million people voted in the European elections. This Europe has influence. This Europe wants to take responsibility for itself and this world. That's not always easy. I know it can be painful and difficult, but it is our most noble duty. People want to see that we deliver, that we make progress. Young people are calling for it. My children quite rightly are saying, don't waste time, do it. And that's what drives me. This is why I need your help and support. And I call on all Europeans, therefore, to play their part. It is the most precious thing that we have. Long live Europe. Vive l'Europe. Long live Europe. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you, Madam von der Leyen. Thank you for your statement. We now will hear from the group presidents, starting with Mr. Weber. Manfred, you have the floor.
Sehr geehrte Frau von der Leyen, sehr geehrte
Thank you, President. Ms. von der Leyen, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. After the election of our president 2 weeks ago, the time has now come to elect the president of the European Commission. I'd like to thank Ursula von der Leyen for the ideas, suggestions she shared with us today about the future of Europe. For our group, my group, the EPP, we are committed to our electoral promise. The commitments we made to the citizens of Europe must guide our work. 40 million people voted for the 138 members of the EPP group. These 40 million citizens expect us to live up to our commitment. That's to say that the promises we made must be delivered on. A fair Europe with equitable living conditions for everybody. A fair Europe where we remain the laboratory of research for the world, further enhancing a position. A safe and sure Europe where we provide secure borders while at the same time helping those in need. An open Europe which trades with the rest of the world and conducts a partnership with Africa. A Europe which protects the environment and the climate while at the same time protecting the social consequences. Ursula von der Leyen is above all a Christian Democrat. She's a convinced European, which is one of the reasons why we will, together with her, be translating into reality our electoral promise, and we will be extending our full support to Ursula von der Leyen today. I would like to extend my thanks to Frank Timmermans, Bas Eickhout, Ska Keller, and other members of this House for the determined campaigns they wage for the European Parliament. I was honoured to be one of those candidates with them in a fair competition in which we all tried to fight to defend our values and to convince people while at the same time respecting the results. 201 million people took part in the European elections. That's a genuine festival of democracy. And all of them shared one wish, which was to see a more democratic Europe. Developments in recent days haven't always comforted that belief amongst people. We've seen examples of egotism from political parties, and that's something which many people view as damaging for democracy. So what's happened over the last few days has caused damage. However, I don't think we can put that damage right by causing further damage. Europe must now be in a position to act. Europe must be stable. This is why 2 weeks ago my group supported the candidacy of David Sassoli as President of the European Parliament, and I expect today that his group and others will support our candidate for the presidency of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. I would like to reiterate, we have to be able to rely on each other. This is the only way that Europe can succeed. Obviously, over the next 5 years, we have to continue to work under the principle of a united Europe. We need to ensure that we have better scrutiny of the implementation of European law and an enhanced and consolidated system of Spitzenkandidaten. We have to ensure that deals cut in smoky back rooms are a thing of the past. This is why I and my group will fight with determination to ensure that we create a Europe for the people. For us as Christian Democrats, today must be a new start. We have to roll up our sleeves and get down to work with Ursula von der Leyen as President of the Commission. Thank you.
Presidente Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Mrs. Garcia Perez for the Socialist and Democrat Group.
Gracias, President.
Thank you, President. Madam von der Leyen, today is an important day. The future of the European Union is in our hands, and my political group, which has been there since the very beginning, has a pro-Europeanism in its veins and wants to help to build our Europe. We accept our responsibility towards the European citizens who put their trust in us, and that's why we will act responsibly. We want to be sure that over the coming 5 years, we will be able to continue to build a project and a sustainable future for all Europeans. I would just like to recall a pro-European on a day such as today, who took the floor in this Parliament 40 years ago, Willy Brandt. In the plenary just after the first direct elections in 1979, he launched an appeal, which I think we should recall today. He regretted the fact that democracy was moving so slowly in Europe. And he also regretted the fact that the European institutions still seem to be too distant from the people. However, members of the European Parliament were able to get down to work despite their geographical or ideological differences. They wanted to solve people's problems and to try to connect with young people. 40 years later, what his words are as relevant as ever. We as socialists want to continue to ensure that we make faster progress with democracy in Europe. We had placed our faith in the Spitzenkandidat procedure, and we're in favour of transnational lists. However, European democracy can't go into reverse. We, Madam von der Leyen, want to ensure that we see the Spitzenkandidat process in 2024. Europe has to be able to solve people's problems. We have to be able to face up to the challenges we face today. And we need to ensure this is the case before we can support you for Commission President. We have to know that you will be possible to lead the change that citizens want, to bring about the transformation that young people are demanding. We think you're moving in the right direction. There are advances. Now, however, we need to see things be properly implemented. We want to see ambition in our legislation. We need to also set binding objectives to ensure that we can meet our objectives in cutting emissions by 2030. Nobody has to be left behind. And so this means that you have to ensure that we have a fund for a fair transition. We also want to see an investment plan for sustainable Europe. It has to be clear that a large part of this has to be done through public investment. When we set the European Sustainable Development Goals and the European Semester, these can't just be seen as a principle. We have to set out clear criteria and indicators. You can't punish those governments who are investing in an economic transformation which is supporting its people and which is laying the foundations for a sustainable future. Therefore, we will insist, and this is something that you set out in your letter, we want to see economic flexibility and an unemployment guarantee. Europe has to take care of its most vulnerable citizens. That's why our political group will always support the European social pillar, and more specifically, the child guarantee and the youth guarantee. Madam von der Leyen, we need to see a stronger stance against poverty in general. Everybody has to play their role in creating these policies. We also have to ensure that we make proper use of technological changes. You've said that you want there to be a shared effort. Have you come up with any specific figures on this? You also said that we have to improve the situation for workers from new platforms. Here you have a political group that would support a directive on these issues. Then when it comes to gender equality, I think we are on the same track. My political group has gender equality as a clear political priority. We want to have binding gender quotas. This is something that would be a very good start if you were to have gender equality within your commission. We also want to see a new mechanism. I think a lot of people in this room would like to see that you plan to be as demanding as the previous Commission, and in particular as Frans Timmermans was when it comes to the rule of law. Perhaps you could explain exactly what you'll do there. We also want to see more solidarity between member states and also a reform of Dublin. We need more solidarity. We have to talk about humanitarian corridors. We can't just strengthen security or to strengthen Frontex objectives. We have to save people's lives. And in order to do that, we need to have some kind of rescue system which won't criminalize those who are involved in humanitarian rescue operations or those who are victim of circumstance. Madam von der Leyen, we're here to listen to you. We don't want any kind of institutional crisis which will just further delay the changes that Europe needs to see. But what we do want are guarantees that the coming years will ensure that Europe will be able to take the measures it needs to. My group will take its position this afternoon thinking about what's the best for Europe. The men and women of Europe want to regain their hope in the European project. And We, of course, want to build more and better Europe.
Grazie. Presidente Ciolo.
Thank you. Mr. Cholos, you have the floor.
Doamnă președintă desemnat, Parlamentul.
Mrs. von der Leyen, this Parliament has never before been so important and has been aware of the responsibility that is upon its shoulders. The Council that put your name forward is split. There is a global package, there is a compromise package that came about after much debate. And I think that it's a shame that the balance between East and West Europe hasn't been upheld. Obviously, if the College of Commissioners were to be better balanced, that would be a good thing. Now, you have been nominated, and it is because of the responsibilities that you have entered into. We want Europe to make progress, and we have high expectations after the elections. All European citizens wished to have a Spitzencandidate system to enable them to select and elect the next president of the Commission, but that hasn't happened. Now, you've talked about a conference for the future of Europe. This is going to make the democratization process possible. And we know exactly what's been going on. We've seen the pro-European groups in negotiation, and we have put together a common platform. In order for your election to go through, we do need a common working framework between Parliament and Commission with clear objectives set out for the following 5 years. And our group is prepared to support you if you are able to promise this renewal for Europe. The deal that you put forward today is a clear one, and the pro-Europeans will certainly be giving you their support, and we are able for European citizens to build a Europe that is able once again to garner support and faith. Before the elections, it was said that there's an awful lot of anti-Europeanism in this Parliament, and that's going to make it very difficult for Europe, but that hasn't proven to be the case. Pro-European forces in this House remain strong, and now the millions of Europeans that voted for us must not be disappointed. They expect of us that we will uphold the rule of law. We mustn't disappoint millions of young people that voted, and the appeal that you have made for the climate, for good cooperation between the generations, these are things that must go ahead, and we mustn't disappoint entrepreneurs and farmers. There must be this possibility for people to live in an open world in a way that is worthy of people, that is ecological, that moves forward, but also takes into account new technologies and doesn't exclude digitalization. It is an important component and mustn't be limited. The single market mustn't just be a bureaucratic arrangement. It must make sure that well-being and wealth is spread. And we expect of you, Mrs. von der Leyen, that you will lead in a pro-European manner. Europe isn't just an administrative setup, it pursues a political objective. And if you are to be confirmed by this House, and I hope you will be, then you will often hear that there are some things that can't be changed. But this is a change that we must see.
Thank you. Mr. Lambert. Our shared house is on fire. A fire caused by a deregulated climate, biodiversity which is collapsing, and natural resources become ever scarcer. This fire is further fueled by the neoliberal revolution and the technological revolution. This fire is also burning up the rule of law and fundamental freedoms. Faced with this three-pronged emergency, it's no longer enough just to state our good intent or our determination. We need a ferocious attempt to change direction, even if that means overturning the efforts of those who want to defend the status quo. The Green Free European Alliance group was elected in May with an agenda for change. We want to be able to count on you, Mrs. von der Leyen. 3 weeks ago, you didn't have the faintest idea that you would soon be holding the highest office in the European Union. In other words, you've been on a pretty steep learning curve. Your performance last week didn't convince us. You didn't seem to show enough urgency, nor indeed a determination to redirect the ship of the European Union. The speech you've just made and the written documents backing it up are a big step forward. I would like to commend your commitment, supported by clear examples, to move towards parity for men and women. I was also delighted to hear you say that you're personally committed to reducing by 2030 our CO2 emissions by half. You've taken up the green idea of a carbon tax at our borders, as well as the idea of a trans-European unemployment fund, which has been a taboo in your political family up until now. However, despite those commitments, what you said falls far short of what we want. Let me give you a few examples. So, for example, why have you decided to raise our efforts to meet the climate challenge in 2 different stages? If we look at the details of what you wrote to 2 political groups, we see the idea of conditionality emerging once again. In other words, we will only move when others are willing to move as well. You also quite rightly underlined that the ecological transition shouldn't leave anybody behind. However, I'm sure you'd agree that if the cost of carbon increases, everybody, including the poorest in society, will be affected. The response to that is not, as you say, a European adjustment fund, but, on the contrary, a root and branch reform of our tax system so as to ensure that finally we move towards greater equity. The environment is more than just the climate. You didn't speak at all about biodiversity or ever scarce resources such as fresh water or farming land. The European farming policy, agricultural policy, has a disastrous effect on Europe, and it's the biggest budget item. But that's, once again, a taboo for you. Once again, your ambitions fall short because of entrenched interests. For the time being, we see all sorts of European instruments which continue to exhaust the planet's resources while exacerbating inequality. You have said that the treaty should include clauses referring to sustainable development, as it already does. However, you very cautiously refrain from saying these clauses should be binding, in particular when it comes to preventing beneficial treatment for so-called investors. Nor have I heard you question the fundamental idea, the very scandal of this fortress Europe. It's quite unacceptable that the European Union continues to rely on failed states and rogue states to guarantee the impermeability of its borders. The cost of this is massive violations of human rights carried out by armed bands or the so-called Libyan border force and coast guards, which are funded with European money. You have suggested a migration pact, Ms. von der Leyen. Let me remind you, madam, such a pact already exists. It was adopted by a majority of 5 groups in the European Parliament. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Please take over our proposal and fight for it in the Council. When it comes to the rule of law, your language was perhaps strong, but your proposals remain very vague. The time now has come to fundamentally change things. We have to ensure that European values be respected everywhere, rather than simply playing into the hands of the heads of state and government like in Hungary or Poland, who continue to regularly violate European fundamental freedoms and the separation of powers. What we need is a clear change of direction in the face of the triple emergency facing us: environment, social and climate. What you seem to be suggesting is incremental changes and all sorts of vague ideas. I'm sure you'll understand that at the present time, the ecologists in the European Parliament are not willing to support you to head up the European Commission. Ms. von der Leyen, let me remind you that since the elections, our group has done its utmost to ensure that we can establish a pro-European and pro-change majority in this House. Such an enterprise takes time. Your insistence on calling for a vote today deprives us of that valuable time. You might have shown great courtesy to us, but we haven't really seen a clear commitment to such an alliance. On the contrary, you seem to be willing to accept support from wherever it comes, including from the nationalist members in this House. And that's something we simply can't agree on. As I said to you a week ago, the haggling starts when somebody says no. So let me assure you that we'll be willing to support you whenever your proposals live up to the enormous challenges facing us in the fields of democracy, the environment and social affairs. In other words, proposals designed to tackle the existential problems facing our continent.
Meuthen.
Thank you. Mr. Meuthen, over to you.
Mr. President, colleagues, Minister von der Leyen, today in this House we have a very important decision to make on a person who will become the President of the European Commission, which is of great importance to the European Union and the Member States, and therefore we will have to make this decision very carefully. It is only somebody of the highest caliber who will be able to take that post. Minister von der Leyen, I have great respect for you as a person, but in our group we have looked into this carefully and feel that the requirements of the post are not ones that you are able to meet. Let me just set that out. First of all, we Germans, we have a way of doing politics, and we have had some experience of that back home over years when you were family minister, minister for work and social matters, and then more recently defense minister. And in none of those offices were you serving the interests of the German people and did justice to the jobs. I will spare people here an explicit list of all of your failings. You saved so much money, you destroyed our army. It has never been so badly equipped, and it is basically incapable of carrying out defense actions. And nobody will rue your departure were you to become Commission President back home, and it is important to take that into account. The German government in earlier times has had posts in Brussels, but there is nothing that we see that speaks in favour of the Commission presidency being done by you better than your previous jobs. There is a long list of vague promises that you made, and often they included their exact opposites, and that has not just given rise to criticism by us but by others. Article 7 procedures against Poland and Hungary being upheld. In the ECR group you said the rule of law was important and tolerance of migrants, but these are obvious contradictions, and there is now a whole panoply of nice sounding ideas that you've put forward. You've been on a media tour, a classical mainstream politician, making empty promises, playing a kind of Jekyll and Hyde game with the groups in the vain hope that at the end of it all there will be sufficient votes that will be garnered for your election. The problem is that you don't have a convincing vision of a modern Europe that will serve the people of Europe, a clever way of focusing on the core aspects of that Europe. In contrary to that, you talk about more competence for the centre and talking on people's behalves. So when it comes to the questions that I put in the Conference of Presidents last week, you first of all didn't answer two of the questions, and the third question you answered in a very unsatisfactory way. So the kind of performance you put in today is not one that we find persuasive in the ID group, and this is why we will vote against you. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Mr. Fito.
Thank you, President. I listened very closely to what you had to say, Mrs. von der Leyen, and also I listened to you in our group meeting. I do have to say that in your words today, I would say that your positions have changed rather from what we heard last week. I would just like to start off by picking up on something that you've said a number of times over the last few days and weeks. You said the Parliament is the heart of democracy. But I would say that at the moment things can only work if everyone respects the system. You talked about gender equality, about the importance of having a woman as head of commission for the first time. But that's just after what we saw yesterday evening in this Parliament. We saw a woman who was already Prime Minister in her own country. It wasn't chosen as President of the Employment Committee. And this is something that's illogical and incomprehensible. And I'm recalling this because I think it's important when we're talking about rules. We can't be hypocritical. We can't ask for consensus or for the Parliament to play a role if we don't respect the D'Hondt system or if these kind of events come about. And in these recent hours, you've written a number of letters. Words may disappear, but letters remain. And so we read very carefully what you wrote to Renew and the Socialists. And so this morning we would like to see some clarifications. For example, Mrs. Garcia Perez asked you for clarifications about the rule of law mechanism. We would also like to have some clarifications from you on this in your reply. Over the last 5 years, we've seen certain methods that have been invented by Mr. Timmermans, and so I think we're talking about different things. And I think we don't have any clarity about this rule of law mechanism that you talked about. It's also important to talk about climate change. Obviously, there are some positive points on climate change. You set out things such as the Just Transition Fund in order to help to mitigate the effects of climate change, a sustainable investment bank, making use of private capital. But once again, you're talking about targets. And we have these very excellent ambitions, but we have no idea how to achieve them. Everything seems to be rather confused. If I've understood correctly, you're suggesting that the target should be 50%. Last week it was 55%. It's quite a significant difference when it comes to the objective we're trying to achieve. Your declaration seems to be one of intentions. Some countries, as you know, are still 1/3 dependent on coal. There are important issues such as ones our group has always spoken out about. You talk about a European minimum wage that would and guaranteeing all young people a job. What resources are you going to use for that? And what about the roles of the individual member states in all of this? You also gave a very nice example this morning about this refugee who came to Germany and you welcomed him. It was a very nice story. But we're not just talking about refugees. We also have migrants. We have illegal immigrants. And perhaps, again, you could provide clarifications on this. Last week, you said something quite serious, we think. Somebody who is under inquiry in our country because they didn't respect the orders issued by the national authorities and helped people flee Italian forces of law and order. This morning, the Libe committee is talking about inviting that person to a hearing. So I'd like to have clear responses from you on all of this as well. That will help us to make the decision that we need to take at the end of this meeting in our group meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shirdewan.
A lei la parola.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you, President. Ms. von der Leyen, we heard a lot in your address about the men and women, the citizens of Europe. Over the last few days, I've had hundreds or thousands, indeed, emails, and I'm sure other colleagues have as well, talking about your nomination. I think it's important the people of Europe, the European demos, be given the floor. I'd like to quote from one of these emails. The person who wrote it said that as a voter, I insist that the European Parliament should ensure that one of the Spitzenkandidaten be elected as President of the European Commission. And the woman who wrote the email continued by writing that the appointment of the German defence minister to the presidency of the European Commission would, in my view, have fatal consequences in terms of the future of the European Union, confirming a trend towards greater militarisation and isolation. Clearly, there is still criticism about the way in which your nomination has been put forward. And I'd like to refer back to the meeting we had last week. You came along and met the left-wing group in the European Parliament. You set out your vision of the European Union. It became clear to us that your vision is quite different from ours. Let me explain. Ours is the only group which is fully determined to reject a continuation of existing policy making. When you talk about the future of the European Union, I think the time has come for us to bring an end, to break a clear break with austerity, this new liberal policy which we pursued for so many years. The fact is, colleagues, national budgets are continuing to be subjected to cuts, and this has prevented us investing in public projects, in investigation, in education, in social affairs, and in hard-hitting measures to help fight climate change. The people who suffer most from these neoliberal policies are the men and women who live throughout the European Union. Ms von der Leyen, if we really are to fight the climate emergency, we have to act now. And if we want to bring about fundamental changes to our economic structures, we have to start by investing now, and anybody who wants to guarantee security for the European Union must start by making a clean break with this misguided austerity policy. 113 million people, these are official figures from the European Commission, currently live below the poverty line in the European Union. We have a clear expectation from any candidate for the presidency of the European Commission. We want more than just flowery words. We want clear commitments. You have to make it clear you've understood. You have to make it clear you're committed to rolling out a social offensive for the European Union. My objective, you should be saying, is that in 5 years' time, nobody in Europe, regardless of how old they are, of where they live in Europe, should see their very existence being threatened. Everybody in Europe should have a dignified existence. So, for example, in the field of tax policy, unfortunately, you've been once again very vague. There's no point in taking kids' gloves when it comes to fighting for tax justice. Our expectation of a credible candidate for the presidency of the Commission is that they have the determination and courage to state clearly they want to bring an end to tax dumping, that they want to close tax havens within the European Union, and that they want to ensure that those with wealth be subjected to fair taxes, so that it's to ensure that we can achieve genuine tax justice. Whereas apparently further billions of euros are now to be invested in the European defence sector. You've made that clear in your address. That's money which would be far better spelt on education, training and social justice. That money won't be going to social affairs, it'll be going into modern weapons systems. Some people are even dreaming about a European space army. To me, that sounds more like a nightmare than a dream. But the idea of a European army or an army of Europeans, you're just playing with words. But your objective is clear. What you want to do is to enhance the military side of the European Union to back up your foreign policy. This is something which our group in the European Parliament rejects decisively. We call for a Europe which tries to help solve conflicts, with a first step towards an international disarmament conference. My final point, I would like to make it clear that the European external border is currently the world's most dangerous border. And this, for me, is a clear sign of the failure of European politicians, the fact that every day people continue to drown in the Mediterranean, whereas those few people in certain member states who continue to defend universal human rights are thrown into prison. Ms von der Leyen, we listened clearly to what you said. I believe that our plan for the future of the European Union, a social European Union, a European Union based on climate justice and peace, I don't think that our vision of Europe is compatible with what you've told us today. So unfortunately, won't be able to support you this evening. Thank you, Mr. Farage, on behalf of non-attached members.
Well, I may be speaking from the back of the chamber today, but as I predicted last time I was here, in the European elections, the Brexit Party were very much to the front of the elections and massive, massive winners. And I come back to a place that has been humbled and humiliated. The European Council stitch-up has rendered this place impotent until today, when you've got some real power if you choose to use it. What you've seen from Ursula von der Leyen today is an attempt for the European Union to take control of every single aspect of our lives. She wants to build a centralised, undemocratic, updated form of communism that will render nation-state parliaments, where the state controls everything, where nation-state parliaments will cease to have any relevance at all. I have to say, from our perspective, in some ways, I'm really rather pleased, because you've just made Brexit a lot more popular in the United Kingdom. Thank God we're leaving. But it is in the aspect of defence that I think people's minds should be focused. She's a fanatic for building a European army, but she's not alone. When it's completed, NATO will cease to exist or have any relevance in Europe at all. And of course, not to be left out of this, French President Emmanuel Macron, on Bastille Day last Sunday, stood at the front of an open-top car with his nascent European Defence Force behind him, looking for all the world like an updated version of Napoleon. Be in no doubt, 5 years of these people, the European Defence Union will be complete. And what is there for defence can also be used for attack. And you as a House will have no control over it. Vote against this nominee, strike a blow for democracy, strike a blow for your citizens. Do it today.
Thank you, Mr. Farage, says the President.
E adesso
I would like now to give the floor to Ms von der Leyen, asking her to respond to the comments made by the heads of political groups. Go ahead, madam. Thank you, President. To be quite honest with you, having listened to the last speaker, that provides further proof how important it is that we continue to work closely with our British colleagues in the future. But I think, Mr. Farage, we can probably do without what you've got to say here. And that's what I find beautiful about Europe. Here in our Europe, countries come together. They come together on a voluntary basis. Nobody has forced them to come together. All our countries know that strength is in unity. By working together, we can defend the values which are close to all of our hearts and which brought us together. The great challenges facing us in the world are so enormous that none of us alone can face up to them. Only by working together, by cooperating, can we develop the strength, the soft power, which is uniquely European and which is at the very heart of our European values. That's the source of our strength. That's why it's possible for us to talk about an optimistic future. This is why it's so important that we deploy our strength to guarantee a better future for our children. Let me now pick up on some of the subjects referred to. The social market economy. This is one of the great characteristics, the unique characteristics of the European Union. This powerful link between a strong economy and our other values. Everybody knows, however, that in this economy everybody has to work hard, and we have to ensure that the fruits of our hard work be given back to the people. That's the key idea of the social market economy. The social pillar of the social market economy is something which is supported by the Commission, the Parliament and the Council. There's a clear commitment to continue to support this system. We have to work with determination to defend that. Obviously, we're still far from perfect, but we're determined to identify shortcomings in the social pillar so as to correct them, and that must be one of our overarching priorities. We've heard as well about sustainability directives. Here, once again, these are leitmotifs in our policy making. Sustainability objectives surely are something which all of us must support. I think it must be clear to everybody now that the clock is ticking. Time is running out. Our planet needs help urgently. our whole life and society is built on natural resources which are under threat. We have to ensure that we can deal with these resources in a sustainable, protective way. This is why it's so important that we all recognise the value of sustainability objectives, and we should all do our utmost to pursue them. As far as the progressive approach is concerned, the two-step approach is concerned, we have to ensure those two steps be rolled out in parallel. This is why recently I've said that we have to start by tackling this in the European Parliament. However, we all know that we need major players in the world if we are to move forward with these objectives. This is why it's important that the European Union can and must take a leadership role. That's the only way to bring about change. The Paris Climate Agreement represented a unique coming together of the powerful in the world. Let's continue to draw on the spirit of Paris, the ideas of Paris, to try to defend our future. The second enormous challenge facing us is digitalization. Here, once again, we have to stand united. On the one hand, we need to be able to draw on those people in society who are able to thrive with the new digital world, who promote our economy. At the same time, we have to ensure that the digital economy be protected with ethical rules concerning artificial intelligence, cyberspace. We have to ensure that we have robust measures so as to ensure that that protects everybody. And we as Europeans have to become major players in the cyber world. We know there are many risks in the cyber world, major risks for our economy, or indeed major risks for our society. Here, once again, none of our states alone are able to face up to those challenges. Only by working together can we succeed in laying the foundations of a secure future, which our people deserve. The human dimension of digitalization must be the primary objective of our economy. We have to protect our people. Somebody who works must be given protection. And we now have to find ways of ensuring that the values which have always protected workers in the existing economy be transferred to the digital economy. How can we defend platform workers, cloud economy workers? We have to ensure that we can transfer that protection for the benefit of all of our citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, I listened to all the speakers very clearly. When I heard Mr. Moyton speaking, I must say I was quite relieved to hear that you won't be voting for me, since everything you said goes contrary to my deepest values.
C'è una richiesta.
I have a request to speak, a point of order regarding the rules. Mr. Semsrott.
Ja, ich möchte.
I would like to refer to Annex 7, Article 1, full